Here we are. Hi, everybody. If you're here, we will be getting started in a few minutes. It looks like we have 5 people joining us, and we'll wait for several more to join before we get in. Hope everybody is enjoying today's sunshine. And our numbers are rising. It's good to see more and more people joining us. All right, we've hit the 1-minute mark. I think it's safe to get started. This will be recorded, so if folks miss the beginning or if you want to pass this along to people, it'll all be here. Before we begin, I want to note that we have Cassidy from the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center here who will be doing ASL interpreting. And if you use ASL, you're going to want to make sure that that you're viewing the speakers in gallery view mode. So you can see there are going to be 4 people communicating during the call, and Cassidy, our ASL interpreter, is one of them. So make sure in the upper right corner of your Zoom window that you're seeing the gallery view. That'll enable you to see all 4 of us who are going to be talking today. So as we jump in, I just want to warmly welcome you on behalf of Jewish Family Service and ParentMap magazine to Navigating Without a Map, a webinar for parents in the face of COVID-19. My name is Talia Gilman, and I'm the Outreach and Education Manager at JFS. And while I can't see your faces, I'm so glad you're here. I'm not a parent myself, but I have a lot of loved ones who are, and have spent a lot of time with my own parents sheltering in place in the last couple of weeks. Just this morning, I was scrolling through Facebook and I came across a timely piece on Medium, an essay by someone named Chloe Cooney, and it was called Parents Are Not Okay. I'll put the link in the chat in a few minutes in case you want to check it out later. But the piece really gets at the heart of why we've convened this afternoon's conversation. Everything we're experiencing with the pandemic, everything you're experiencing as parents is really, really hard. It's unprecedented in our lifetimes. It's confusing, meandering, and accumulating. We've all been at it for a few weeks already, and maybe some patterns are emerging at home. There are certainly tons of resources out there to help along the way, but it's overwhelming and easy to get oversaturated. So yes, many parents are not okay. There's no guidebook or map for navigating this new abnormal, but you're the captain of your family ship and you have to navigate moment by moment, one day at a time. So many parents are not okay, but maybe there's a way to expand okayness. And that's why we're here together online today. We're so glad you're tuning in to ask pressing questions about parenting in the time of COVID-19 and to learn from a few experts who are parents themselves about how you might think about, talk about, and manage the rocky waves of this pandemic as the individual humans you are and as parents or grandparents caring for your kids and grandkids. So before we really dive in to address the questions that many of you submitted in advance, I want to acknowledge and appreciate the folks who have played a role in this happening. Doctors Lelach, Rave, and Don Shifrin are the people who will share their wisdom and expertise with us soon, and I'll say more about them in a minute. Also here with us, who you can't see yet, but who you will later, is Elaine Sulkin, who's the publisher and editor-in-chief of ParentMap, and she'll be here to share some good insights and resources with us at the end of this hour. I also want to give a shout out to some of my amazing colleagues at JFS and ParentMap who have pulled this webinar together essentially on the fly. And I want to say at the top that we're grateful for all of you who are signed on for joining us in this inaugural JFS webinar. This is the first time we're doing something like this as an agency, and we appreciate you being here for this experiment and for your patience if anything funky comes along. We have some folks who are working behind the scenes on technology, so do indicate in the chat if anything goes wrong or if you need help. So here's how this will work. We've curated the questions that many of you shared when signing up. I'm going to introduce Drs. Don and Lelach in a moment, and then ask them an opening question to get the conversation going. They'll share insights, and I'll continue to share your questions for the next 45 minutes or so. We know that on this call, there are parents and grandparents of children ranging from infant to toddler to young child to preteen to teen to adult. And I think I saw someone list their kids' ages as 35 in the sign up. So there's a big range. And what we're talking about may differ in various ways along the age spectrum. So we're going to do our best to hit on essential notes today. And as I already mentioned, this will be recorded. So if you don't catch everything, you can go back and review or send along to somebody in your life who may benefit. If at any point you have questions you want to raise, you can enter them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your window, and we'll see if it's possible to weave them in. We may not get to everything. This is an experiment, and we may find the need for another one of these, but we're glad you're here, and we hope it offers you some useful and responsive information and affirmation. So now our panelists. Dr. Lelach Rave is a primary care pediatrician at the Everett Clinic and previously practiced hospital-based medicine at Seattle Children's and UCLA. Lelach has served on the board of the Washington chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics and currently co-chairs their legislative committee working on issues of child health in Olympia. Lelach also serves on the advisory board of Camp Kesem at the University of Washington. When not in the clinic, she's quarantining at home with her 3 kids who are 16, 13, and 9, her 2 pups, and her husband, Rabbi Will Berkovitz, who's busy running JFS and who we're glad is here today too. Lelach, I don't know if you already gave a little wave, but you can go ahead and do that. Dr. Don Shifrin recently retired as an Eastside pediatrician for almost 40 years. He's a clinical professor of pediatrics at the UW School of Medicine and has been interviewed many times in print, on the radio, and on TV about a wide variety of pediatric physical, social, and mental health issues. And most recently, he spoke to Radio MD about helping families stay home with all the disruptions caused by coronavirus. And Cassidy Gotchnauer is our ASL interpreter from the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center in Seattle. And if you use ASL, please pin Cassidy's video to your screen so that you can see her throughout. Again, that's through the gallery view. You can access Cassidy's video and then locate the 3 dots which enable you to pin her video. So thank you all for being here today. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we're in good hands. So for many of us, this is our new reality. Working, maybe full-time, administering school, trying to manage behavior and activities, managing household needs, trying to stay connected with loved ones. And when you're on like this 24/7, it becomes harder and harder to pay attention to your own and your children's needs. But in this scary and upsetting time, meeting the family's needs, basic and emotional, is essential. And the stuff that makes meeting needs possible, things like patience, creativity, and resilience, these are more feasible when we're in a good place ourselves. So while it may be natural to first or primarily ask, what can I do for my kids? It really seems like you can't bypass this essential question. What can I do for myself right now? So I want to open it up to you, Drs. Don and Lelach, to start with this. There's this idea that on an airplane, you're always supposed to put your own mask on first. So how should parents be thinking about putting on their own masks right now? What can parents do to maintain and present their best selves during this time of crisis? What does self-care look like?
All right, so I'll get us started. Thanks everyone for being here. Hopefully Don and I can provide a few insights and maybe a little grace to help as people are going through this time. And I think just to start, let's not sugarcoat it. This is hard. It's hard for us as parents. It's hard for our children. And by extension, parenting in this situation is hard. There are going to be challenges that come up that are new and unpredicted and will push us in ways that we may not anticipate. And so, as Talia said, really taking care of ourselves is going to be very important so that we can endure this journey. And part of the challenge, I think, is that we don't have a clear endpoint. Oftentimes, human beings get through hard things by knowing, once I get to the other side, this is my reward. This is the finish line. And no one at this point knows when or where or how that will be. And that's challenging. How do we navigate that? One of the examples that came to my mind earlier today was quite a few years ago when I was training to run a marathon. And for those who haven't done that, the way one trains for a marathon is you do lots and lots of mileage, often in short little increments, and then about once a week you do a really long run. And I recall that the really long run often didn't feel as hard as I feared it would. It didn't feel as hard sometimes as the shorter runs that I was doing on a more frequent basis. And when I thought about it, the reason those long runs were as doable as they were is because of mindset and because of expectations. I went out on those runs with the expectation that this was going to be hard and long. And with that, found a way to pace myself and found endurance and strength that I maybe didn't know that I had. And I would encourage all of us to look at this next period of time similarly. This is going to be long and it's going to be hard. But if we can approach it with that mindset, if we can really set our expectations accordingly, I think all of us as parents and as humans will find that we have some strength and endurance that we may not know is there deep inside. We might find reserves of patience and creativity that we didn't realize we had. And that, I think, is what's going to be able to help get us all through this. Go ahead, Don.
Thank you, Lelach. First, thank you all for attending and being so attentive to your family's needs. I'm going to be brief. If I had one word to describe where we all are in our lives, I would choose that word as overwhelmed in this new reality that we're living with social isolation and the persistent threat of illness. We're all feeling unsafe and uncertain. And as a result, our emotions are multiplying daily and exponentially. Every day we have different and larger emotions. But I want to remind everybody that there's no species on Earth that's more anxious than humans, because we have the ability and we also have the curse to imagine a very dark future. And imagining one of the worst things that can happen is actually happening now. But the paradox that I like to think of is that we're also the most capable, resourceful, and resilient species. We're really good at adaptation. And knowing that fact, I have confidence that parents can stay present in this crisis and maintain their ability to provide physical safety and emotional security and even economic stability to their families. Well, we've lost a lot temporarily, hopefully, but we can still gain a lot from being alone together. Parents have been, and they are now more than ever, their family's first responders. And I don't want to underestimate your parental strengths here. And like Lelach, to bravely face this crisis. And just as another reminder, culturally, we can draw on our own ancestral history to tell us that resilience is our shared Jewish inheritance. And taking stock of that will remind us how adaptable and resilient we can be as we get into answering some of these questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for opening up the conversation in a really empowering way. So as I mentioned earlier, we've curated the questions that have come in, and we want to start with some of the more concrete, basic information about the virus and how it presents, and then we'll move into some more focused themes built based on your questions. So just to establish a bit more of a context, and in thinking about how parents might be able to communicate these things to their kids, could you just speak a little bit about to the point of what is coronavirus? How is it different than COVID-19? How is COVID-19 different than coronavirus? And why do we not see children affected? How do we know if they're carriers?
Lelach, you want me to start on that?
Go for it, Don.
Coronavirus actually is a member of a family of pretty minor respiratory viruses that happen a lot during the season. So we've all been exposed at some point to different coronaviruses. There's 5 or 6 of them, and they're usually fairly minimal: runny nose, postnasal drip, a little cough, maybe a low-grade fever. So not very significant. But this new virus, which mutated from animals in China, basically is a virus that we haven't seen before. So it's called a novel or a new virus. And it is proving to be extremely dangerous to humans, much like the SARS virus and the MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus, was way back. So because we haven't seen this before, like HIV in the old days, basically we have no protection against it, and we have to now develop our own immune system protection. Now, for some reason, and we don't know why, children under the age of 10, and there have been some, especially some with pre-existing medical conditions, that have not fared well with coronavirus. But as a general rule, the serious illnesses that we see in people 60 and older have not been seen in youngsters younger than 10 or 11. That does not mean that they may not get the virus, but it means that somehow, in some way, their immune system, maybe because they've seen a lot of viruses recently and their immune system is, shall we say, tuned up, as opposed to some of our older systems. However, there was a 104-year-old that just went home from the hospital after coronavirus, so we can't be sure about that. So in essence, children are still at risk to get the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, which is also called COVID-19, coronavirus infectious disease in 2019. And they can transmit it even being with minor symptoms. So that's a quick answer to that. I hope that was appropriate.
Lelach, did you want to add anything about what symptoms might look, anything more about what symptoms might look like? I know, Don, you were speaking to the different presentation and age groups. But if a parent is sort of wondering if their kid is sick, is there anything in particular they should be looking for or thinking about?
So I think as we're getting further along, we are discovering that this virus looks different in different people. And so generally, as Don said, runny nose, cough, low-grade fever, those are all very common manifestations. However, we've seen some folks who are coming in just with stomach manifestations, things like nausea or vomiting. We see some folks who never have a fever. And so really, unfortunately, we don't have all the answers. And if your kid is sick, regardless of whether or not it's coronavirus, the answer tends to be the same in terms of what to do. And that is keep your child at home, rest, fluids, and try to minimize exposure of your child to other individuals to keep the spread of whatever it is, be it coronavirus or another virus, from getting beyond your household.
Any tips on how to protect others within the household from getting sick?
That's a tricky one. 3-year-olds really do not understand social distancing. It is a challenge. However, again, it's the really basic stuff. It's the wash your hands and wash your hands again. And you might find yourself reminding your kids every time they go in and come out and sit down at the table for a snack. I think that's really what you can do. If you have an older child, you may be able to somewhat isolate them in a room, but for a preschooler, toddler, infant, obviously they're going to be in contact with all of you in the household, and you just want to try it as much as possible to keep hygiene up.
Well, I think that leads into our next question, which is how do we explain these new and difficult and confusing situations to kids at different age points while still providing a sense of safety and security? I mean, it's one thing to coach a child about hand washing and sanitation and whatnot, and another thing to really create a context for what's happening. So what insight can either of you offer us about how to, what language to be using in talking with children across the age spectrum about what's happening right now?
Lelach,
You want me to start, Don?
sure.
All right. So I would say, regardless of the age of the child, using simple, direct, honest, age-appropriate language is what we need to aim for. And so be very honest in terms of what you're saying. There's no point in lying or trying to create an alternative reality because they will find from some source or another a contrasting viewpoint, and then you end up being stuck in an interesting spot of having to explain why you said the first thing. So be honest, but also be aware of what the real question is, because often as parents, we anticipate that children are asking things that they may not be asking. So be very clear about what is it that is concerning or curious for your child and answer that. And you may not need to go into deeper, more complicated things because your kid may not be there. And if they are there, they'll push you and ask you further, and then you can go with them. So follow their lead, but be very age appropriate and simple, I would say. And there's some really fabulous resources out there for different ages. Sesame Street has produced some fabulous content for preschoolers to explain the coronavirus. There's also a fabulous video by an organization called Brain Pop, which I have seen a lot used in school-age children to explain the coronavirus. So there are some really great resources out there. And once you get to teenagers, they're consuming media on their own. And so being with them as they consume that media, being available to answer questions as they arise, asking for their understanding. What do you understand of this? What worries you about this? I think really helps you meet them where they are and walk with them.
I certainly would agree with all of that, including the fact that for young kids, I always like to give them a frame of reference about illness. Remember when you had a cough and a cold last year, and after a week or so you were better? Well, there's an illness now that's making older people very sick. And because of that, all the doctors and all the scientists are telling us we have to be very careful too, and this is how we can be careful. And then you can ask them, well, even the youngest children, you can ask them, how can you tell us what you would do to be careful other than washing your hands? And for kids that are washing their hands, there's a great poster that you can make on something called washyourlyrics.com. And you can put in the lyrics of any song you want, and it will make a poster using those lyrics while kids wash their hands for 20 or 30 seconds. And it's kind of fun to put up on the bathroom mirror. But I would use their frame of reference, and I definitely agree with Lelach in terms of the older kids. What have you heard? Because some of the older children, including teenagers, are more fearful and anxious than their parents. And that's a tough, shall we say, nut to crack. So you want to know what they've heard and give them accurate and honest information and tell them that this is what you can do as a family as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of the questions that we received from the community prior to today really focused on the anxiety that's coming up for children, whether it was toddlers who were referenced and teenagers alike. So I think what you're speaking to is really responds to part of that, which is like engaging the young person in a conversation to get them talking and to sort of tap into what the sensations and the experience of this is. What else can you share about how to deal with or address or support anxiety in a toddler or a teen? So we're talking across the age spectrum here, but what other reflections and insights do you have about sort of being with a child or a grandchild in terms of the anxiety, especially when it sort of manifests in different behavioral ways?
Well, for toddlers, a lot of times getting them in touch with their feelings and being a good steward of their feelings means explaining feelings to them. So sometimes I'll use a sheet where we've drawn faces that are mad, sad, scared, and happy, and we'll have them identify which face they are at the moment and then explain, can you tell me why you're this face? Or can you tell me why you're that face? What makes you happy? What makes you scared? We all have to be good stewards of our own senses right now, and suffering as we are, it's very difficult to come in contact with them. So when I hear people say, you know, I'm feeling out of control, basically what they're doing is they're not losing control, they're noticing their anxiety. And I think with older kids and teenagers, that's what you can point out. And then you can say, how can we, as a family, and how can we talk about anxiety? How can we mitigate that anxiety or manage that anxiety? What are some of the things that we can do and some of the tools that we have? And certainly, as Lelach will tell you, there's plenty of places online to do that. But, you know, it's okay to mention that. Mr. Rogers used to say, anything that's mentionable is manageable. And when we talk about the feelings, they become less scary. So, you know, again, talking about the feelings is really the key here, and getting them out in the open instead of saying, you know, I'm here, we're safe, everything's fine. That's just not going to probably translate well. And I'll turn it over to Lelach here.
One of the concepts that I would love to mention that I find really useful is the idea of mirror neurons. And that is the idea that in our brains, in our neurochemistry, we are designed to mirror what is happening in the neurons of individuals that we interact with. And we've all experienced that. We've all walked into a room where something's happened and we don't know quite what it was, but you can feel the tension the moment you walk in. And that's your neurons are picking up on what's happening in the room around you, and your neurons are mirroring it. Your own heart rate comes up, you feel a little bit tense. We have that same thing happens with our children all the time. So when you have a toddler who is throwing a tantrum, your brain is designed to mirror what's happening in that toddler's brain. Your neurons can go into that overwhelmed state just like your toddler is in. That can be the bad news and the good news, because the good news is that the toddler will also mirror you. So if you're able to stay calm, if you're able to take that deep breath, then the toddler begins to be able to mirror your neurons and get some of that calmness and some of that groundedness from you. So know that when your little child is maybe going on the deep end, it's not to make you crazy. It is because they themselves are trying to cope in the best way they can. And if you can be that grounded, calming force, they have the opportunity to mirror you and hopefully get to that same space themselves. The other thing that is interesting, and hopefully you guys aren't hearing my dogs barking too loudly in the background. The other thing that is interesting, I think, for teenagers in terms of anxiety is I feel like we're seeing two very different things happen. There are some teens for whom anxiety is increasing quite a bit right now with all the unknowns and the dangers of COVID. There are other teens for whom school is a major source of anxiety. And so being at home actually, and maybe ironically, is actually bringing down their anxiety levels. So we have a whole group of teens who actually feel, I think, more safe, more secure. They're no longer having to do things like manage the risks of being on public transportation in the midst of a pandemic. They're at home. They're in their safe space. And for some folks, actually, for some teenagers, this is actually a calming thing. So it's an interesting, again, like there's so many manifestations of the disease, there's a lot of manifestations of the emotional repercussions.
I think I would piggyback on that and say, you know, anxiety is expressed in different ways. Your young child may have stomach aches, may have headaches, and Your older children may be frustrated, angry, upset. It may come out in a way. Exploring those feelings is going to be necessary. And Lelach got into the homeschooling, which I'm sure we have some questions about, and we will get to. But I think the key thing, as she said, is role modeling positive behaviors. Remember, we get down to the basics: eat, sleep, move. Those are great things to help decrease our anxiety.
Don, I wonder if you want to say something about, I think we were planning to get to it later, but I wonder if you want to say something now about the oversaturation of news among teens, or really children of any age. But you want to say anything about that as it relates to anxiety?
Well, that's a great question, and also brings up the ability of us to role model too, because there's two pandemics now. The first is coronavirus, and the second is what I call an infodemic. The 24/7 news cycle, 16 emails from various sources about how the coronavirus is being expressed and what people are doing about it and how many ventilators are being sent where. I think parents have to probably control their own usage before they look at their children as a good role model. And people are doom surfing, is what I call it, surfing areas where the doom scenario and the apocalypse is coming. So I think that this is part of being overwhelmed right now. And if you want to dedicate some time to that in the morning, an hour of surfing just to get information, or tuning into one program on whatever news channel you want, and discussing it calmly at dinner or at meals, fine. But learning how to control that impulse is one of the things that we can do to really safeguard our family and provide security at home. Because again, you don't want to have what I call our panic amplifiers. Panic amplifiers are when we get upset from reading something and then talking about it incessantly with our spouse in front of our children. And if you really are sad, depressed, angry, if you've had, God forbid, an illness and a death in the family, even distantly, and you're concerned about that, by all means, let people know that you're unhappy, sad, mad, scared, but plan to do that in a place that's separate from especially the young children.
Absolutely. And we'll get back to some more questions regarding screen time in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to sort of start at the top with some really practical questions that people have been asking. And we're going back a little bit to the medical side, but one of the questions that came up quite often in the submissions was really around masks. So we're making a bit of a pivot. But there are a lot of folks wondering about whether you recommend children wear face masks when in public. I know there's been some more recent conversation amongst the administration around masks. So should children wear masks? Should adults wear masks? And what kind of masks work? Or do bandanas or fabric masks work? Tell us what we should know about that.
Lelach, you want to go, and I'll just piggyback on you?
Sure. So the recommendations have changed over time, and most recently now the CDC is recommending some sort of face covering when folks are in public. But backing up, I would say try not to be in public with your kids so much. Let's take this quarantine thing seriously. Be at home when you can be, and when you're out, because you certainly should be outside with your kids, especially a gorgeous week like this. Be outside, let your kids run, play, have exercise, but not necessarily in crowded spaces. And then you kind of eliminate the whole question, which is probably the easiest way to go. If, however, you have to be in a place where there are going to be other people, the most recent recommendations are to use some sort of face covering. The idea that a bandana or a cloth is more effective than nothing is now what the CDC is saying. I, as a healthcare provider who is experiencing the real shortage of medical masks in a healthcare setting, would encourage you not to be using for yourself or your children N95 masks. If you have a stockpile, there are so many clinics and hospitals that would love to use those. I would encourage you to find a place to donate them. You do not need that level of protection. The N95 mask has the 95 because it's eliminating 95% of the microparticles in the air that could be coming at you. Unless you are going to be in a full-faced cough with someone who is ill, you don't need that level of protection. Having just a simple piece of cloth or a simple mask is more than enough. And the people who are really at risk would so appreciate having the more sophisticated, higher level masks.
I would agree with that. It's not like bicycle helmets where everybody who goes out has to wear a bicycle helmet. But I think there's another thing about wearing masks. It's not only protecting the person across from you if you're in the store and if you have to go to the store for something or the drugstore, it also gives them a sense of emotional stability, knowing that they're more protected because you're wearing your mask. So it's not just for you, it's for other people as well. There's various and sundry ways to make masks all over the internet. You can find ways to do it. I made one from a t-shirt, putting paper towels in it or shop towels in it, which makes it hopefully more or less porous. Tea towels are supposed to be terrific in terms of being less porous, but almost anything will do that is covering your nose and below your chin and fitting tightly across your face. If you have problems with your eyeglasses fogging up, you're going to have to put a little material on them to keep that from happening, because that can happen as well. But again, as Lelach said, if you're going out with your kids to the park and there's nobody around, let them run, let them have some exercise. But again, people are looking for others to wear masks. So now if you're outside and you're going to a store and you're not wearing a mask, people are looking at you askance, shall we say. You're not following the directions or the recommendations, even though from our administration, some have chosen that it's just a recommendation and not required.
So I have a nuanced question related to this that may give you an opportunity just to emphasize once again what you're saying. But before I ask that, I just want to remind everybody listening in that we have the Q&A function. So if you have a question right now that you'd like for us to try and address during the remaining time we have together, look at the bottom row in your Zoom window and you can pose that question to us in the Q&A function. So getting back to what I wanted to bring back, I've seen a lot of conversation among parent friends on Facebook. What about a play date or just hanging out with another family who has also been sheltering at home? What if we've been, self-quarantining for a couple weeks? Would that be okay? So I just want to pose that to you because I've seen a lot of discussion online about that recently.
My comment, and I'll just make it briefly, is the risk-benefit ratio on that is not happy. That is just, again, putting your children and their children at risk. And again, if somebody was exposed to measles, you probably wouldn't want them in your house. So because we're unsure and uncertain about a lot of things right now, there's really no reason to do that. But obviously, having social play dates is going to be important for kids after this is all over. And I think my opinion would be I would medically postpone that.
Okay, and we've got another couple of questions. Lelach, maybe you can take this one about visiting grandparents. Can we sit in their driveway or while they're in the garage? What if we maintain that 6-foot distance? How can we really connect with our elders who might be vulnerable, but in a way that's safe?
So I think this is a fabulous opportunity to use technology for the good. You could get on a Skype call, you can figure out Zoom with your grandparents. I think there are a lot of ways that we can maintain social distancing, but not have social isolation. And I know my own mom spends hours singing to one of my nephews via Skype every day. And I think it's great for his parents because they get a little bit of a break. It's great for my mom because she gets to connect with a grandchild. It's great for him. So I think that there are ways to make that happen, which can be safe and meet everyone's needs and not put folks at risk.
Yes.
I'd love to also add that it's a great opportunity for grandparents to interface the other way with their grandchildren and read to them every day, as well as parents. Reading aloud is something that is soothing, and it certainly, again, gets us away from having screens on all the time. But having grandparents read aloud every day is a great opportunity for them, and they love that.
What a beautiful suggestion. Okay, so we're talking about how important it is to really prioritize sheltering in place and staying at home with, some outdoor time. For many families, some of what's taking up that time is trying to do school remotely from home and engaging in distance learning. So, we've gotten questions about how to motivate children to study while at home, and just given everything else you've been talking about in terms of the social emotional realities of all of this, what are ways that we can motivate children to engage in their studies and schoolwork? That's the first part of the question related to distance learning, and then we'll come back to the second.
So I guess I'll start this one, as I have 3 kids who are trying to distance learn at home right now. It's tough, and different kids and different learners engage with this very differently. And I think the starting point has to be gentle with yourself and gentle with your kids. Everyone's adjusting. This is not the way that they're accustomed to doing school. And for some folks, while it may be an easy transition, there are others for whom this is really going to be a challenge. And I would say, as more and more schools really are doing organized activities around learning, being in touch with those teachers and communicating regularly about how your child is handling the transition is going to be important, so they can get support not only from you, but from the folks in the school. And, figure out what's going to work for your kid. And for some kids, it's going to be short little snippets of education with breaks in between. Some folks are going to be the kids who want to get it all done, their assignments for the whole week on Monday, so they have the rest of the week off. Every kid's different, but really figuring out what works for your child and being patient with them. We're all going to have to be flexible and creative as we make this work. I think the other thing to really know and value is that in addition to academic book learning, this is a really unique time to do some real life learning. You may teach your kid how to fry an egg, and you may teach them how to scrub a toilet, and you may teach them how to do other things that you may not have gotten to working on so much. But this is a perfect opportunity for that too.
Yeah, I certainly would echo the homeschooling, including life skills, including if you have a 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, Lelach, conflict resolution might be a good life skill to work on. And obviously,
we're working that one.
Obviously, it has to come from the parents, but there's things about homeschooling. I know that the big thing that youngsters always require is routine and schedules, and of course, those are all cattywampers at the moment. We're all upside down with those. So trying to maintain a rigorous schedule for kids learning, and I agree with Lelach, is very, very difficult. So flexibility is the key, as she said, not only in their learning, but in their learning space. Let's maybe do math at a desk, but maybe we're going to do reading on the couch. Wouldn't suggest the bed. Let's check in with them and realize that when they're learning and they ask questions, positive reinforcement is probably better than negative correction. And including also with teenagers, what's the best time for them to start school during the day? A lot of times, the youngsters are up and they're ready to start school maybe at 8:30, but the 16-year-old doesn't want to start till 10:30. So one size does not fit all at home. And last thing, which I love, is when there's a problem, have the elementary school children and even the teenagers teach you. I call it the Protege Effect, where when they teach you, they learn it faster and better than if they try to teach themselves sometimes. So be curious, praise their hard work, and realize that the new abnormal is going to be difficult, and they have to contribute with some of their solutions as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So the other side of the question is, how do I communicate with my child about the need that I have to focus on my paid work? How do I sort of juggle those two priorities to really administer in the way that you've described their educational experience, but also to preserve my own ability to do my work? What insights do you have there?
Lelach, I'm going to let you start with this one because I've got two things to say, and that's it, because I don't have kids bothering me at home.
Got it. Again, this is tough, and if you have the luxury of divvying things up in terms of time and space, use it. So if you have the luxury of doing some work early before kids wake up, or in the evenings or during nap times, I would say use it as opposed to fighting the fight in the times when they're actively engaged and awake. If you have the luxury of having a spouse with whom you can split, and one person can work in one part of the day and one person in another, use that as well. Not everyone has those luxuries. And then I think doing some pre-planning hopefully can help quite a bit, whether that is laying out snacks beforehand so that every time a kid is hungry, they don't have to interrupt you. There's some healthy, nutritious things available. Or if it is creating a little, a box of toys that only get to be opened when you're on a Zoom call. And so it becomes a treat. Oh, mom's on a Zoom call. I get to do these special toys. Doing some of that pre-planning, I think, is probably your best bet. And just realize it's going to be hard. Go ahead, Don.
I echo all of that, including curating perhaps a Sesame Street video for younger kids, or one of my favorite Hey Arnold episodes, which every episode is a value of somebody or something. So certainly I think it's a struggle. It's a struggle, and one size, again, does not fit all for all families. If you can arrange schedules so you have the option of alternating with your significant other, that's a great solution. But again, sometimes you don't, and so preparation really is going to be an opportunity for success.
Yeah. So another scope of questions that we received really had to do with how to be responsive, how to parent responsively in light of different developmental considerations that that kids are navigating. So how do we support our tweens who are having fewer opportunities for social interaction and also privacy? How do I support my 5-year-old daughter who's engaging in language development and social skills at that point in her life? How do I continue to sort of foster what is developmentally relevant right now without the ability to really be in direct proximity to other kids, and without the ability to have the same kind of privacy that many of us might be used to?
Why don't you start us off, Don?
Well, middle school is a fractious environment for most tweens. So sometimes being somewhat socially isolated may not be a bad thing temporarily. However, the key is staying connected. If we can get the tweens and teens to stay connected with their friends, collaborate with them, create with them, and connect with them, I think that's really the big thing. There's a lot of creativity going on, not to mention that we don't have to have them making 15 Instagram posts a day or 200 TikTok videos. I think there has to be some boundaries there. But for the younger kids, again, curating their environment, I think is the key here, because we can keep them entertained. And there's lots of other things in terms of life skills, puzzles, Legos, etc. we can use developmentally, depending on where your child is at the time. Really, parent now becomes more of a verb than a noun, because we really need to pay attention to where they are developmentally, and in terms of reading aloud to them or selecting readings for them that have some meaning, whether it's poetry or Child's Garden of Verses, things like that, I think is very important. But the key value here is also for some youngsters who are now challenged at school and don't have their special ed teachers and don't have their language instructions going on. finding them online tutors. There's lots of high school students out there that are at home that would love to be tutors for teenagers or tweenagers that are having difficulties with math, physics, chemistry, and their own homeschooling. So the problem sometimes you can outsource that to places that you can find online because there's a big network out there.
Thank you, Don. I don't know if it's coming from, I'm going to break the fourth wall here. I don't know if it's coming from your microphone, but there's some scratching noises that many of us are hearing in the background. So anybody who's got audio on, I just want to name that while we're talking. Lelach, did you want to offer any thoughts about this theme?
I agree with what Don said completely.
Great. What about, so we have sort of two more buckets of questions before it'll be time for us to wrap up. I wonder if one of you could speak to something more specific related to developmental considerations, specifically different behaviors that are manifesting, perhaps in relation to anxiety or just age-based development. So how could we make our way through willful or defiant behavior? Right now, you know, of course, you've been speaking so empoweringly about how to make the most of this time in productive ways, but how can we sort of work with and support kids who are engaging in defiant behavior and sort of maybe reacting to the fear that they're experiencing? What are some concrete tools that we can use to address that in a way that sort of preserves our own well-being and sanity as parents?
So a couple of different things come to my mind. One is to know which battles to fight. And it may be that you choose to let some defiant behaviors go. A good question, I think, for us to ask as parents often is what's happening dangerous? Is this a safety issue? And I had a friend once who said that they used the line with their child, "My job is to keep you safe." And so whenever anything would come up, the parent would say to the child, "All right, so tell me, what's my job?" And the kid would say, "All right, yes, your job is to keep me safe." And I almost had trained the child to know that, okay, when mom intervenes here, it's because it's a safety issue. And they began to sort of know the answer themselves when the parent would intervene. So know which fights to fight, I think, is a place to start. And then, like I was saying earlier, trying to ground ourselves so that we can be grounded for our kids. Because when they are going off the rails, they need to have some calm neurons to mirror. And if you can keep yourself grounded, if you can take those deep breaths and slow your own heart rate first, you're going to be much more successful in getting that child to calm down. And also just acknowledge that it's hard, that you know they're feeling cooped up. You know that they would much rather be out playing with a friend or doing whatever their particular thing is that makes them light up that they can't do right now. And so acknowledging that, speaking to that truth, and then once we're in that calmer space, figuring out together, okay, so what can we do instead? What are the other options that are available to us? And I think for most kids, there's going to be something out there that they can say, oh yeah, that will help. That will be something I can enjoy.
Yeah, I just want to chime in. The family dynamic is fragile at best. And there's an old saying that parents are only as happy as their most unhappy child. And the family right now, because we're all together and socially isolated, we're sort of alone together. We have this dynamic where if one youngster is really becoming a difficult issue in the family, confrontation sometimes is not what we want to have because that can accelerate the issue. Maybe take them aside one-on-one rather than both parents confronting the youngster and say, you know, I can see that this is going on. Validate their feelings, understand where their feelings are coming from, but also tell them, without promoting what we call guilting, tell them that we're all in a space that we have to get along with now. How can I help you with the issue that you have? And sometimes they just have to retreat to their cave and work things out on their own, and give them that option, give them some time to do that. So again, I think that what Lelach said about finding a solution is going to be different for every family, but the key is going to be working through that solution, because you can't go around them. You're going to have to go through them. And saying to the 5-year-old or the 7-year-old or the 8-year-old, why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you spell like your brother? Why can't you eat vegetables like your brother? Is probably not going to move the needle very well.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the clock and astounded that it's 4:25. So sadly, we've run out of time to answer additional questions right now. But I want to invite both of you, Dr. Lelach Rave and Dr. Don Shifrin, to offer us just like a 30-second summary. What would be some of your words of wisdom that you, as parents yourselves and as experienced pediatricians, would offer to the parents who are on this call with us?
You got this.
Yeah, sure. Let me. I want to be brief. My last message would be to parents to stay connected. Stay connected to your family, relatives, friends, and community. I want to reinforce again the thought that parents now are tasked, whether willingly or unwillingly, with sailing their family ship through these rough and uncharted seas of where we are in this situation. And this really basically foreign moment asks much of all of us. It calls us not only to care for others in our families, but also to try and be gentle with yourself. Try and be gentle with ourselves. Don't be too hard on yourself when you can't totally banish fear and pain. We now have more emotional needs than sometimes we have resources. So do what you reasonably can do. And I would ask all of you to practice self-care and also self-compassion. Try to find what you can do comfortably to provide stability with yourself. And as Lelach said, this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. So there is no best anymore. There's just what will work for our family, what seems to work. And some days are not going to be easy, but again, we all can adapt and get through this. That's our heritage.
Doctors Don and Lelach, thank you so much. And in light of everything raised, things that we got to and things we didn't get to, I want to invite Elaine Salkin, who's the publisher and editor-in-chief of our co-host today, ParentMap, to share a brief announcement about how ParentMap is set up to be a resource to parents and families in this time of COVID-19 in ways that build upon and respond to some of the questions and needs that were raised here. So Elaine, take it away.
I really just want to say thank you tremendously to JFS for putting this together, and to both Dr. Lelach and Don. You guys were fantastic. I learned a lot. So thank you so much. The only thing that I would add, I've spent a lot of time in the last few days on with the Seattle Public Schools, and I think there's a lot of words of wisdom for self-compassion and care and how we deal with each other. I think teachers are uniquely challenged today, and they are unbelievably dedicated to children of all ages from university on down in keeping them engaged. And there's a lot of different issues around equity and access. Even if your teacher is able to connect with your child and it's not instruction or education, but it's an emotional connection, it's really important. So I think on top of all the gratitude for putting this together and learning a lot, the one word I would say also to parents is show it to teachers, because they are really working hard. And then ParentMap, just go to parentmap.com. We have an updated page on COVID-19, /COVID-19, that is updated multiple times a day. And from issues that are coming out of Children's Hospital to set up a tent in your backyard, you know, make a fire and have s'mores and figure out ways to have fun. And we're big fans of being the good enough parent. So it's a whole new definition of being the good enough parent. I think that both Don and Lelach really highlighted that. But do the best you can and be thankful, you know, that the environment that you have. So again, thank you to JFS in putting this together. It's great.
Thank you, Elaine. Well, in the spirit of being a good enough parent, whether it's a fun activity like camping outside in the backyard, or really locating the resources that are needed in a given moment, I want to mention before we wrap that if anyone in your household might benefit from counseling right now, like dedicated work with a therapist, or in general, after this pandemic passes, please know that our team of counselors at Jewish Family Service has availability and are able to work with kids, teens, young adults, or adults of all ages at low cost. So if that sounds like it could be beneficial to you or people you care about, please log on to our website to learn more. And stay tuned for more experiences like this. We hope to offer more of these webinars to support ourselves and the community with a focus on different experiences and demographics in the weeks and maybe months ahead. So sign up for the JFS newsletter or follow us on Facebook to learn more. The video recording of this webinar will be posted there, I believe today, so you can check our Facebook for that if you want to review anything that you've heard or want to share this with other people. For now, I really just want to reiterate deep and sincere thanks to our partners at ParentMap. Elaine, thank you for being here and cheerleading both parents and teachers, and for the work that ParentMap does to amplify an incredible and robust slate of resources that are curated and available and accessible to the community. Again, check out parentmap.com. I think that's the website. And Cassidy, I also want to thank you for making this webinar more accessible to people who are deaf or hard of hearing and use American Sign Language. We're really grateful to you and the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center for being part of this. And of course, Doctors Don and Lelach, thank you so much for offering your insight, experience, and wisdom to us and weaving together so many aspects of this reality that we're all navigating, because your warmth and care have really mitigated some of the overwhelm for me, even though I'm not a parent. And I'm confident that what you share will be helpful both immediately and over time. So everyone working behind the scenes at JFS, thank you as well. And we hope that you'll continue to stay in touch with us and to check out the resources that are available online through JFS and through ParentMap. I'll close with just a nugget of Jewish wisdom. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov is a great thinker in the Jewish community, and he was known to have said that the whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid. But things right now are terrifying. There's so much unknown. So the most important thing right now is to remind ourselves that we're not crossing the bridge alone, that we have one another, and we're grateful to all of you for spending a little bit of this afternoon with us, leaning into that sense of togetherness. So we wish you well. We hope you stay healthy and sheltered, and we look forward to connecting soon. Take care, everybody.